If you guys watch my channel, you know that I like to make comparison videos where I compare two different players and ultimately try to decide who's better right now in the NBA. I've made 4 of them already. If you want, you can go and check those out as well, but pretty much all of those videos I've been comparing players at the same position where they're actually comparable as actual players. But today I'm going to be doing something different. I'm going to be going through the 2 top MVP candidates right now in Nikola Jokic and Steph Curry, go through both of their MVP cases and ultimately try to decide who I think should be the MVP of 2021. The MVP discussion has been really interesting because we've seen a lot of guys miss time with injuries and also because of protocols with the pandemic. But at the start of the season, we saw how LeBron James and Joel Embiid were most likely the 2 candidates or top candidates for the MVP, but they missed time with injuries. We know that Giannis has always been in the conversation. There's been times where Damian Lillard was thrown into the conversation, and even a really valuable player, a guy like Chris Paul. But I think we can all agree that the conversation has boiled down to Nikola Jokic or Stephen Curry. Of these 2 players, who is the MVP? So like I mentioned, I'm going to be going through both of their cases today and try to determine who I think is the MVP. Before we get started, if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. Only about 20% of you guys watching right now are actually subscribed to the channel, so make sure you do so you don't miss out on any new videos. And also follow me on Instagram at danieldelari.yt. I'm going to be very active on here during the playoffs, especially in my story, so make sure you don't want to miss out on that either. With that being said, let's get started. So usually in my comparison videos, I do a pretty simple format of determining who's the better offensive player, the better defensive player, and then ultimately how they impact winning the most. And I'm going to be doing a similar thing today, but a little bit different just because we're talking about the MVP specifically. So let's start with Stephen Curry. Steph Curry has legitimately looked like his 2016 form this season, and he's the definition of a valuable player. I'm going to talk about this with Jokic as well, but when we look at Steph Curry, he led his team to the 8th seed this season in the regular season. Ultimately, they lost in the play-in to the Grizzlies, but without Steph Curry, this Warriors team could legitimately be the worst in the NBA. I mean, they don't really have another pure scorer on the team. Maybe you could count Andrew Wiggins as that right now, but you see when you watch these guys play that Curry is ridiculously valuable to this team, and they would go nowhere without him. He's the guy who completely controls their offense, and he sees double teams and triple teams every night, and because of this, he has amazing gravity, is such an amazing playmaker as well, and overall has an insane impact out there on the floor. If he had a better supporting cast, the Warriors, as we know, would still be in championship contention even right now. But when we look at Steph Curry's impact this season, has been insane. Like I mentioned, he always draws attention to him, and he's also one of the best playmakers in the NBA, just like Jokic. I think we can agree that Steph Curry is a top 5 playmaker right now. When it comes to passing, he's averaging 6 assists on the season, but we know that he has amazing gravity, always gets teammates wide open, and constantly, as I mentioned, draws double teams and triple teams. We look at some of his basic stats this season. He's averaging 32 points per game, which led the league this season. He's easily a top 3 scorer in the league right now, arguably the best, and he's averaging 32 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, as I mentioned with the assists there. But an amazing overall season from Steph, and the fact that he does it this efficiently too with his play style is insane. Shooting 48% from the field, 42% from 3, as he pretty much always does, despite taking incredibly hard shots, 92% from the line, never missing free throws as always, and he's been insanely overall efficient this season, shooting a 60% effective field goal percentage, which is ridiculous, and a 66% true shooting. As a point guard, this is just incredible stuff that we're seeing from Stephen Curry. Now ultimately, something that does go against him is how he didn't lead his Warriors team to a better spot, whereas Jokic did. Jokic led his team to the 3 seed, and Curry only led his team to the 8 seed, and they ultimately did miss the playoffs. But it's without a doubt that Curry is one of, if not the most valuable player in the league to his team. As I mentioned, without him, the Warriors would probably be one of, if not the very worst team in the league. Now on the defensive side of the floor, Steph is a guard that doesn't have much impact on the defensive end of the floor, and because he is a guard, it really doesn't matter that much, but I think we can classify him as an average defender. He brings some intensity out there on the perimeter, and if you watch him play, I think we can all agree he's around an average defender. But overall, as I mentioned, his impact is insane. The Warriors' offensive rating this season when Steph is on the court is around 112, whereas when he's off the court is 104, which is one of the worst in the NBA. So that really clearly shows how impactful of a player as he is. As I mentioned multiple times, he led the league in scoring this season, really looked like his prime form, and absolutely has a case for MVP. So let's talk about Nikola Jokic. Jokic is another one of those players that is absolutely the definition of a valuable player. Like I said with Steph, the Warriors would not be the 8th seed. They'd probably be one of the worst teams in the league without him. You could absolutely say the same thing for Jokic. He led his team all the way to the 3 seed this season, and if they didn't have him throughout the entire season, they probably wouldn't even be a play-in team, to be honest. Like, you watch Jokic play, I've watched a lot of Nuggets games this season, and their offense completely runs through him. He's one of, if not the very best playmaker in the league, at least in my opinion, and the impact he has out there is insane. He's averaging around 8.5 assists this season, which is absolutely insane as a big man, easily the best in the league as a big man. And something I forgot to mention for Steph Curry too, we know that both of these guys are amazing playmakers. It shows through their box creation. If you guys don't know what this stat is, it's basically kind of measures how many open shots the player creates per game. Jokic is 5th in the league in box creation with around 15, and Steph Curry has a 13.8 box creation and is 7th in the league. So it really shows how many open shots and the impact that they have out there on the court and the open shots that they create. But Jokic, in my opinion, is one of, if not the very best playmaker in the league. He has an amazing impact out there, and he's also scoring insanely this season, averaging around 26.5 points per game on very similar efficiency to Steph. I know that they score in many different ways. Obviously, Jokic more down low and in the post, but Steph also usually has a huge shooting gap when it comes to him and the guy that you're comparing him to. But even though Jokic is a big man, he's very lethal in the pick and pop, as we know. Can pull it from 3, is shooting 39% from 3 this season, which is a drastic improvement from last year. And we saw just how impactful he can be shooting the basketball, and because of this, it also ups that playmaking ability because people respect him more on the perimeter now. But overall, Jokic is shooting 57% from the floor this season with, as I mentioned, 39% from 3, 86% from the line, so almost 50-40-90 as a center, which is absolutely ridiculous. And just like Steph, a 60% effective field goal percentage and around a 65% true shooting. Obviously, Steph is the better scorer. He does it on higher volume, much more higher difficulty, but Jokic is right there when it comes to scoring with Steph, and Jokic is a slightly better passer and playmaker, averaging around, as I mentioned, 8.5 assists to Steph's 6. And something we also have to factor into this debate, especially because it's an MVP debate just for this season, Jokic hasn't missed a single game this season. Despite his big frame, and you might think he's a little bit injury prone, he played every single game of the 72 this season, which is obviously a very important stat to factor into an MVP debate. Guys like LeBron and Joel are barely even in the conversation anymore because they missed games this season. So Jokic played every single game this season, 72 games, whereas Steph Curry has missed a few games this season and has only played 63 games. And when we look at Jokic on the defensive side of the floor, again, nothing really special here. He's a slightly over-average defender, sometimes has a good impact in the paint, and this season has a 2.5 defensive box plus minus, which is very good, and also a 3.4 defensive win shares over the course of the season. And for his position, he's probably around an average defender. Overall, maybe slightly above average. Sometimes he can be a liability when you put him in certain situations, but overall, defense in this debate doesn't really factor in much since both him and Steph are pretty much average defenders, at least for their position. A few more stats here to throw out. Jokic this season, when he's on the floor, the Nuggets have a 117 offensive rating compared to around a 111 offensive rating when he's off the court. Again, kind of the same as Curry there, just having an amazing impact. The second unit is being run when Jokic is out of the game, so they will have a lower one, obviously, because they don't have great players out there. But both of them, you can really see their impact with stats like their box creation and their impact and how teams are so bad when they come off of the court. And overall, they just have such amazing impacts, and it's a really close comparison. Now, I'm ultimately going to make my final decision very soon, but I've got one more huge thing to factor in here. Now, if you guys watch my channel and watch my comparison videos, you know I don't often like to look at advanced stats. I can pretty much determine how good a player is by looking at their basic stats and watching them play. But a lot of advanced stats here really factor in, especially to MVP conversations, because they show really how valuable a player is towards their team. And Nikola Jokic is number 1 in the entire league in every single one of these stats. Player efficiency rating with a 31.3 in that stat. Offensive win shares with 12.2, overall win shares with 15.6, offensive blocks plus minus with a plus 9.2, an overall box plus minus of 11.7, again leading the league there, and an 8.6 VORP, which is value above replacement player. He also ranks second in the entire league in offensive rating with around 120, about 0.3 points behind Kawhi Leonard there, and also second in the league in player impact estimate with a 20.1, only 0.2 behind Joel Embiid at 20.3. Jokic's impact this season has been insane, and as I mentioned, all of these advanced stats that some of you might not even have heard of before are basically just measuring the impact that he has out there on the court. Things like win shares and player impact estimate and player efficiency rating and offensive box plus minus. All of these stats that I just went through basically measures their impact on their team. And obviously Steph Curry ranks high in these stats as well because of his impact, but not nearly as high as Jokic. Another thing to factor in here, as I mentioned, Jokic has led his team to the 3 seed, but he's done this with the entire last third of the season without his duo mate and second best player and star player on the team in Jamal Murray. And ever since then, he's continued to lead this Nuggets team to success, and they have a 16-8 record without Jamal Murray this season, basically just because of him and the impact that he brings to the court with his incredible unique scoring ability and his ridiculous playmaking. And ultimately, my final decision of this video is going to be to give the 2021 MVP to Nikola Jokic. It's an extremely hard comparison. Curry is the slightly better scorer, but Jokic is extremely unique there as well. Both of these guys are incredible playmakers, both top 5 in the league. Personally, I think Jokic is probably the best playmaker in the NBA. He's easily the best playmaking center out there, and overall, it comes down to a few things like these advanced stats at the end and just how much of an impact that Nikola Jokic has out there. And when you look at the award and how it's the most valuable player to their team, ultimately I think that means Nikola Jokic. I think the biggest factor here is how at the end of the season he's led his team to the 3 seed in the Western Conference without their second best player in Jamal Murray. Steph Curry's had his Andrew Wiggins and his Draymond Greens the entire season, but Jokic had to do this without his second best player, and he still led his team to one of the best records in the NBA. And ultimately, both of these players scream valuable players. They're extremely valuable to their teams. They bring so much on every given night, but it's such a close comparison. Ultimately, I'm going to give the MVP for this season to Nikola Jokic. So there you have it. That's the end of today's video. Comment down below who your MVP is between Jokic and Curry. This season, the MVP comparison has been extremely interesting. As I mentioned, lots of different guys in the conversation throughout the entire year. It ends up coming down to a point guard and a center, which just makes it that much hard to determine who's actually the better player and the more valuable player. But this video was very fun to record. It's an extremely interesting comparison. As I mentioned, make sure you subscribe if you're new. Comment down below who your MVP is, and I'll see you all next video.